I grew up with absolutely no ethnic consciousness. I related to being a member of my own immediate family. I had no idea that almost the entire South and that huge portions of the United States were populated by a sort of tribe of the Scots-Irish. I wasn't really conscious even of being Scottish in any sense. But when I had a first son on the way, I wanted to be able to tell the new son that was about to be born and any other children I might have who their father's ancestors were. And it was while my wife was pregnant with our son that we went to Scotland for the first time. And it was on that trip that I came across the statue of William Wallace. I had heard that there were Wallaces in Scotland, and that's why we went. But we walked into Edinburgh Castle, and there, flanking one of the main entrances to the castle, were two statues, one of Robert the Bruce and one of William Wallace. And I said to one of the guards there, was of the Black Watch, a very short, tough Scotsman in a kilt, who is this William Wallace? And he said, well, he's our greatest hero. And I said to the guy, his dates are contemporary with Robert the Bruce, and I knew Robert the Bruce was the greatest king of Scotland. I said, so they must have been allies, I suppose, in fighting against the English. And he said, well, no one will ever know for sure. But our legends say that Robert the Bruce may have betrayed William Wallace in order to clear the way to become king of Scotland himself. I walked away from that moment thinking I may have just heard the greatest kernel of a story that I've ever heard. When I first met Mel, I'd gotten a phone call from my agent saying, are you sitting down? And I said, no. He said, sit down. Mel Gibson wants to have breakfast with you tomorrow. So I walked around my neighborhood and I prayed sincerely to God that I would not kiss his ass. And in those words, dear Lord, please don't let me kiss Mel Gibson's ass. Because when you're around movie stars who have the power to launch massive budgets in movies and massive script development, then the tendency of everyone is to try to figure out what do they want to hear and try to give them what you think they want to hear rather than what you really believe. And I really needed to get right within myself about, my commitment to try to be true to what was true for me, and that only in that could I be true at all to him or to anyone else. And I went the next day and met him, and very close to the first words out of my mouth were, look, it's this way. Every movie has a message. And the message of most movies is the guy with the bluest eyes, the cutest dimples, the biggest biceps, the greenest money is the one who prevails. Most movies say that. This movie says, if you're faithful to your heart, even if they cut it out of you, you prevail. Now that's a movie I want to make. That's a movie I want my sons to see. You want to make that movie, I'm your man. You don't want to make that movie, life's too short. And he looked at me like he thought I was insane and he couldn't wait to make a movie like that. I saw that he was that guy. And probably, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't have said that if he hadn't been that guy. There's something about the magic of people coming together who are of like spirits. And I might not have been able to say that to another actor, but I could say that to Mel Gibson. I have to explain something that's surprising and disturbing to a lot of people about the nature, to me, of writing and research. I do most of my research after I've written. It's not because I don't care about a sense of accuracy, but there's a plausibility element and a relatability element to drama. I was looking for timelessness, not the sense that I could be a kind of travelogue or history lesson about the given area and the setting. The best example I can give of that is that I didn't know when I started writing whether the primary artillery weapon of the day was a crossbow or a longbow, a sling. I didn't know. But I did know that to stand on a battlefield outnumbered 4 or 5 to 1 was a significant event. I didn't know what William Wallace said, but I knew he had to say something that would inspire the Scots to stand, so I wrote what would have inspired me. I wrote what gave me goosebumps.
Would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
I understood those people, and still do to this day. The people in Scotland, the late 1200s and 1300s when the movie is set, of being people who were angry with the way they were treated and didn't know what to do about it. So what I was really trying to get at in the context was what the people were like inside. In one of my early drafts, I wrote that the Queen was looking out her window as the rain sheeted down the window panes. And one of the English people who was looking at the script early on sort of sniffed to one of my friends, "Oh, this Randall Wallace knows nothing. There was no such thing as glass in 1305 or whatever it was." I wasn't concerned with those things. I figured we will figure those things out. But who are the people really? And what is the attitude of the English about them? What is the attitude of the Scottish soldier and the Scottish woman who wants to get married and have children and live free? What is that? And how do I capture that? Part of the challenge of doing this story and the technique of meeting that challenge for me was to engineer the story in reverse. I had certain evidence. Looked up William Wallace in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and basically the entry is a couple of sentences that say almost nothing is known about William Wallace. Winston Churchill wrote in his History of the English-Speaking Peoples a brief passage of William Wallace, and he says, this was clearly a man of incredible courage who inspired his people, and it is from that we understand him. Just the fact that even to this day, the tales of him inspire his people. But we don't know the specific facts about it. And I had to look at that and think, well, what was it that enabled this commoner to become the head of his country, to become the head of the military, the guardian of Scotland, and really by kind of acclamation?
There's a difference between us. You think the people of this country exist to provide you with position. I think your position exists to provide those people with freedom. And I go to make sure that they have it.
The character undergoes a development through the story. He reaches a point that I didn't know he would reach until I was there writing it. But he reaches a point of understanding that just the will to win isn't enough. He's got to let go of his own conceptions of winning. It's not just that he's got to kill everybody that's against him. But he has to be willing to die. He has to be willing to risk his life in a whole different way.
Where do you think you're going?
I'm going with you.
Oh, you're going with me, eh? And what are you going to do?
I'm going to help.
Hey, and a good help you'd be too.
I had no idea when I started writing this that I was going to write the whole front section of the story about William Wallace's childhood.
I can fight.
I know. I know you can fight. But it's our wits that make us men.
I did it because I was nervous about the story. The story felt like Mount Everest, and I was afraid of tackling that story. I thought, I've got to work into this gradually. So I thought, well, I'll start with, as a kind of writing exercise, I'll write his boyhood, just to get me into the story. I don't even know where to start this story. So I started with, I will tell you of William Wallace. And from the very first words, I was writing what actually turned out to be the movie. I mean, I didn't do a lot of revision with the way it came out. I got into his father coming back in a cart, dead, his uncle holding up the broadsword and saying, you learn to use this and then I'll teach you to use this. And I could feel those things starting to come together. But when William Wallace is standing at the grave of his father, and he's a boy and he's alone, I remembered a story in my family of my uncle adopting a neighbor child whose parents had died, and no one else wanted to take the kids, but someone had to. And I thought, that's how William Wallace is at this grave. And I was writing that scene, and it was unbearable. It was like I was living the story on the page, and here William Wallace is standing at that grave, and none of the other neighbors want to come up and comfort him, because they know if they do, they're taking responsibility. They won't be able to walk away from him. And I'm thinking, I can't stand this. Someone's got to do something. And then I thought, it would be a child. It might be a girl. And that's when she breaks the flower and goes back and gives it to her. And I was hopelessly in love at that moment with that woman. Now, I had no idea that he was going to save that flower. But I knew that William Wallace returns as an adult. And I thought, why does he really come back? And for me, the main reason he came back was he wanted to find her. He wanted to find love. And so in the final moment of their encounter, of their date, if you will, that he's leaving her and she's thinking, I don't even think he likes me. I mean, he hasn't, and she's waiting for him to do something, say something, try something, kiss her, and he can't. And she starts to turn away, and I thought, he's got to do something. He's got to. And I thought, he'll give her something. And I literally wrote, and he catches her hand, and he hands her, and I didn't know what he handed her. And I thought, yes, I do. He saved that flower. And I gasped. And I was in theaters when women saw that. And I think that's when women fell in love with him. The presence of religious symbols and of religious acts like prayer before battle, and the spirituality of the wedding ceremony and the prayer, before William Wallace is executed, came in the writing for me without a particular self-consciousness of them.
I'm so afraid.
Now, the truth of the matter is, when people have said to me, what were your historical sources that inspired Braveheart? As much as anything, if I were to be truly honest, I'd have to say the New Testament. I mean, Mel read the script and understood instantly that prayers like William Wallace's when he's in prison and he says, I am so afraid, please help me to die well, are parallels with the Garden of Gethsemane and Jesus of Nazareth saying, take this cup from me, I do not want it. And it wasn't for me to try to insert my own dogma. I don't believe in my own dogma. I think my understanding of God is erroneous. It's the best I can do, but I don't believe that I can understand God or explain God. But what I do is I experience faith. And that's what I wanted William Wallace to do. I wanted him to experience doubt, and I wanted him to affirm faith, because I believe that that's what he did. Robert the Bruce's statement when his father says, all men lose heart.
I don't want to lose heart. I want to believe as he does.
Well, that was what I felt when I was writing it. I wanted to believe as this character does. And I believe that that was what Mel related to, and that others relate to that. It's that longing and that need. And I believe that's why that people of various dogmatic understandings are not put off by the overtly Christian symbols that are in the movie, because they're not about Christian dogma, they're about the universal power of faith. The way I reflected on the execution was the way the line, every man dies, not every man really lives, was born.
Every man dies.
because I was thinking of the notion, the modern humanistic assertion that life should be about gaining the most pleasure that we can gain and having the most fun that we can have and living the most amount of days. And that has never made sense to me. That's never felt true to me. And you reflect, why did Jesus want to go into Jerusalem if he knew he would die in Jerusalem, and he knew his disciples had no idea, they hadn't really learned what he wanted to teach them? That he couldn't teach them by just talking, he had to teach them by dying. And there was an echo of that for me in saying about William Wallace, because when I was writing it, I didn't have to write it with an execution scene at the end. The movie could have been that he goes back and he avenges her death, and that's the kind of shape of most movies. It's a revenge story. He wins, we end with him triumphant, and we don't deal with the fact that, okay, 700 years later, William Wallace would be dead anyway. So what is the real meaning of his life? And would he ask himself that very thing when he was thinking, okay, here's what I can do. I can just continue to fight all this time, but that's not really getting us anywhere. I have seen that. Now I have to, one more time, try to meet them face to face and say, we can do this if you believe, even though every time they have failed to believe, I still have to do it again. And I was asking myself the question, what would this story lose if instead of going to the execution, we just make the story about some triumphant thing? Now, I can tell you honestly, there was not ever a moment that I seriously considered not having the story be about William Wallace's execution at the end. I knew it had to be, but I was trying to understand why it did have to be. In part because I thought I might get a studio note saying, hey, we really don't want to end this story on a downer. If I'd walked in and said, the guy gets disemboweled and beheaded and pulled to pieces by horses, and you're going to feel triumphant, most people would have thrown me from their office. But I thought the real reason is that every man dies, and not every man really lives. And I thought, that's what William Wallace has to say. And that kind of became, for me, the essence of what the story was. In the search for the personal, up-close personal experience of William Wallace and wanting to pass that along to my sons, I've gone to various places, the Wallace Well, Glasgow, and found various statues of William Wallace all over, and tried to go to those places, particularly even up in the Scottish Highlands where there's no civilization evident, and to walk beside a loch and see what I could channel in those moments. But I didn't really feel that I had found my own sense of walking with the spirit of William Wallace. I actually found that more hauntingly when I was in London, and I went to St. Bart's Hospital alone, and the place where William Wallace was executed, and there's an ancient church very close by, really near the spot. The hospital was certainly not there when he was executed, but you really feel this is where it was. And I walked into that church and I thought, William Wallace probably didn't get to come here, but this was a place where connected to him. It was a place from his time. And I had a moment of feeling that I was talking with him directly. And I said to him, William, I've done my best. I hope I have told your story fairly. And I felt a sense of peace. I felt a sense that it was done. And I walked out, and there by the monument to William Wallace was a new spray of daffodils. And they weren't there when I walked in, and I thought, yes. When I look back at where I was when I was writing it, before I had any imagination of who might be involved or how big the project might be, I was really writing my own hopes. I was affirming on the page for myself as a kind of prayer who I wanted to be, what I wanted my life to be about, what I wanted my own life to say. And in that classical, I think, example of a writer who is, you know, who is in some ways, in no sense, the character he's writing, except in his hopes to be the character he's writing. And maybe it is our hopes that make us who we are.